Hello, I'm Lee Baker, co-president of Atheists United, and my guest is Mr. Harry Schwartzbart, a longtime active member of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Separation of religion and secular government is a major concern of our organization, Atheists United. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Mr. Schwartzbart. Thanks for coming.
It's a great pleasure for me too, Lee. I think we should dispense with the formality, and please call me Harry, and if you don't mind, I'll call you Lee.
Oh, that'd be fine. Why don't you tell us about Americans United for Separation of Church and State, how long it's been in existence, its goals and purposes, and particularly what is the scope of membership, the range of membership?
Americans United for Separation of Church and State was founded in about 1947 with the single objective, the single plank in its charter, and that is to uphold, defend, fight for the separation of church and state, which is mandated by the First Amendment to our Constitution. The First Amendment to the Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That means, in plain language, that religion is a private affair and no concern of the state. The members of Americans United come from just about every religious denomination, and those who profess no religion at all, like atheists and agnostics and humanists. They just have a single common concern, and that is that there shall be separation of church and state.
Now, you were telling me earlier that you have a particular urgent need, you feel an urgent need to establish an active chapter of Americans United in this area, although you told me there were a number of members that belong to the national organization. You want an active local chapter, and it's urgent right now. Can you elaborate on that?
Certainly. The organization is national in scope with headquarters in Washington, D.C., and there are many members who belong to it from all over the country. But since there is a battle going on right now, and it's being fought to a large extent at the local level, we need local chapters and local participation. The basic struggle that's going on is between two groups of people. Those, on the one hand, who believe in the separation of church and state as mandated by our Constitution, and those who, for whatever reasons, financial or otherwise, or power, wish to tear down that wall, and some of the extremists wish to completely eliminate, not just lower it.
They want to impose their rules on the whole society. And
that's correct. As a matter of fact, William F. Buckley, who stages a TV program called Firing Line on various topics of interest, had two debates in the past, in 1993 and 1994, bearing on this question. In mid-1993 or late-ish 1993, there was a debate in which the question, the following question was debated: resolved, we have nothing to fear from the religious right. And in 1994, the question was debated: resolved, the wall of separation between church and state should be lowered. Those two debates did an excellent job of exposing the agenda of the religious right and really what they want to accomplish by their efforts.
And sort of brought up what the other side is interested in as well, which is good.
That's true.
And when you were saying how active the religious right is on the local level, that's mostly what they're stealth candidates trying to get their people on the school boards affecting our whole education system. We'll get to that a little bit later. I wanted to bring out the question about why separation of church and state is particularly important in this country.
The reason is because we all came from different cultures and different ethnic backgrounds, and that is a strength of America, that we've all brought our best to this country. They came here to escape religious persecution. If you're talking about a very homogeneous country like Japan, then it's not that important. But since we all came here with different viewpoints, why our founding fathers felt that it was especially important to establish religious freedom in this country and therefore to completely separate church from state. I have a personal interest because my parents came here to escape religious tyranny in Europe. And I was the first of my family to be born in this country. America has been wonderful to me, and I want to do everything I can to make sure that my children and my grandchildren forever enjoy this, at least as much religious freedom as I've had in this country.
And I imagine since your parents had suffered the other situation, they continually reminded you
Why,
of
certainly.
how fortunate you were.
We know how great America has been for freedom.
Absolutely. Now, Atheists United is strongly opposed to prayer in public schools or even a moment of silence. And I noticed that your information project did a very good research. Here it is, God and the Public Schools. It's very nice that you have these pamphlets and anybody can be an expert after the work your research department does and puts out in the pamphlets. You want to give a little bit of the information that's in that pamphlet?
Yes, as you say, we have a staff which is extremely capable in Washington, researching all these questions and publishing information in the form of pamphlets and books, some of which I have brought with me. And this one is entitled God and the Public Schools. And it points out and reviews the cases that have come before the Supreme Court of the United States and the findings of the Supreme Court on this issue. And those findings are that the public schools by law, must remain neutral. Now, that means there are certain things that are permissible and some things that are impermissible, and they are detailed in this booklet.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Now, the reason it's so serious that we have people on the local front combating the encroachments of the religious right in the schools is that they tried, besides having the prayer and moment of silence, which is a little toe in the door you talked about, they also want to decide which books are in the library, which subjects are on the curricula. They want to teach creationism, and they don't like science. And a democracy depends on people having judgment, common sense, critical thinking, all the knowledge that's been acquired over the years. The religionists who seek to take over a secular government deplore worldly wisdom, citing biblical references like Matthew 10:16, 10:19, Corinthians. Bible authority that wisdom is evil and earthly knowledge is sinful, and that's why it's just so important that we all work together to see that the religious right does not take control of our public schools.
That's correct. We all know the difference between religion, which is accepted on faith, and science, which is based upon verifiable fact, the operative word being verifiable. They have different functions in our lives, and they differ in essential method. It's essential that our students be taught how to think critically and objectively if we're to be successful in this democracy of ours. Our democratic form of government simply can't exist if we don't teach our students to think critically and objectively.
Mm-hmm. Of course, they have the freedom to teach the religious things in the parochial schools, but you and I and groups that we belong to really oppose the financial support to parochial education, in the form of vouchers or tax exemptions and so forth. You agree with me that money should go to the public, improving the
Yes.
public schools?
Our position is that of Thomas Jefferson, that public tax money should not be used to support private or parochial schools in any way, shape, or form. He was completely unambiguous on the subject, and I'd just like to read the short quotation from possibly his second greatest document after the Declaration of Independence, and that is the bill that he wrote for establishing freedom in the colony of Virginia. And what he said was that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. I might say that the Supreme Court of the United States, when it has considered cases which bear upon the use of public tax money for the support of private or parochial schools, has upheld the position of the the First Amendment and that of Thomas Jefferson, and that is that such tax money should not be used for that purpose.
One of the other issues that's really significant on this battle of the two sides is if you're going to go by the religious doctrine, be fruitful and multiply, and unlimited propagation, proliferation of people beyond what the planet can support, overpopulation, that's a real danger. And you want to comment on that?
Surely. There are people all over the world, Lee, who are very concerned about the overpopulation problem. And we have an interesting example of the imposition of theological positions on this question in the Cairo conference, which was held in September of 1994. We all witnessed a spectacle of the Pope, based upon his theological views, holding up the business of the conference for several days because he objected to the wording of a small paragraph in the agenda, the program for the conference. That agenda, incidentally, had been prepared by representatives from over 100, somewhere between 100 and 200 people in preparing this document. And the Pope, as I said, because of his theological views, objected to one paragraph in that document.
So it's sort of, what do they call that, filibustering?
Kind of.
Sort of filibustering. There's so many issues that are significant that when the religious right has their impact on, such as the right to choose and things, and sex education. What are some of the other issues you would call that are very important that we maintain a secular government that isn't influenced by theology?
To name a few, abortion, birth control, family planning, euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, the teaching of creationism, Sunday closing laws, homosexuality, same-sex marriages, women clergy, female empowerment, capital punishment. That's
quite a few. So it's, people can read in the newspaper what happens when you have a theocracy, such as Iran and places like that. Women have to wear veils, and the government puts out contracts on anyone who disagrees with the holy books and things of that nature. It's pretty scary.
If you read some of the writings of the religious right, you have to assume they wish to establish. In fact, they are demonstrating that that's exactly what they'd like to do in this country, establish a theocracy.
You had some quotes. From some of the religious right leaders that we all know and really don't love.
That's right.
They were pretty interesting, and maybe you could read some of those.
Certainly. They show the agenda of the religious right. Pat Robertson said, "There is nothing in the U.S. Constitution that sanctifies the separation of church and state." He also said, "We often hear of the constitutionally mandated separation of church and state. Of course, as you know, that phrase appears nowhere in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights." He also said, "The radical left have kept us in submission because they have talked about separation of church and state. There's no such thing in the Constitution," he says. "It's a lie of the left, and we're not going to take it anymore." Well, I've already read the 16 words, which does show that the Constitution does address separation of church and state. Let me read some of the others. Cardinal Anthony Bevilacqua, Archbishop of Philadelphia, said, "If we can get a private school voucher plan through in one state, then that's the foot in the door. That's what I want. I want to see it passed in one state and let it go through the courts to remove that notion of separation of church and state." Robert Simons of the Citizens for Excellence in Education said, "There are 15,700 school districts in America. When we get an active Christian Parents Committee in operation in all districts, we can take complete control of all local school boards. This would allow us to determine all local policy, select good textbooks, good curriculum programs, superintendents, and principals. Our time has come." Jerry Falwell has said, "I hope I live to see the day when, as in the early days of our country, we won't have any public schools. The churches will have taken them over again and Christians will be running them. What a happy day that will be." And I think this has to be about my favorite because it's so incredible for most Americans, practically all Americans, to listen to or believe. Pat Robertson said in a fundraising letter, "The feminist agenda is not about equal rights for women. It is about a socialist, anti-family political movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians." And let me add one more that Ralph Reed said. He's the executive director of the Christian Coalition. He said, "We think the Lord is going to give us this nation back one precinct at a time, one neighborhood at a time, and one state at a time." Now, if those quotations don't frighten you, I submit that nothing does.
Well, the only way we can combat that sort of thing is to get our views out. And of course, we have to have the support for whatever we say. They have no problem saying things off the wall like that. But that's why it's such a wonderful thing that Americans United has this research department putting out all the information so we can back up our statements. And I love this one.
Yes, this is one of our newest pieces of information, and it's entitled "Yours to Protect." And what's important for Americans to protect is that these 16 words in the First Amendment shall be upheld and fought for. And those words are, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof."
So when it's there in black and white, how come we're still having all of this litigation all through the courts, all the way back from the 20s when we had the Scopes trial? And it's over and over and on and on. It's never ending. That's why we simply can't go to sleep on this
That's correct.
issue.
The people who wish to intrude government into religion or religion into government never give up. They continue to carry their fight. And we must constantly guard religious freedom in this country, and therefore the Supreme Court is always being called upon to make judgments in individual lawsuits about particular infringements of the wall of separation.
You know, one of the most egregious examples of their boldness is the fact that Ollie North is running for the Senate that he lied to. And he's going to be a senator with the group if he's successful, which of course would be a tragedy if that's the case. And when his followers are questioned about supporting him, because he lied to Congress, he broke the law. They say he should not, God's laws are higher. That's the kind of thing that has to be overcome. We would have anarchy without having secular laws. This is a saying that, and which God's laws? You know, we have over 1,000 different religious groups in this country.
Yes, who's God?
Who's God? Which God?
That's right. Well, the point is that we even have people who have killed doctors who practice abortion. And they say they are doing God's work, obeying God's laws, and therefore they can ignore the laws of the country. Obviously, that's an unacceptable condition for any civilized society, and I'm sure a position that practically all Americans would have. Yes, that's correct.
We have to combat that.
And Americans would be unified in their feelings about that.
I think we just have to have the consciousness raised. And this is wonderful material that the Information Project gathers, that any person who wants to be an expert in the conversation with their friends or neighbors can get the information without digging it all up. And what are some of the other services that Americans United provide besides this wonderful research and educational materials?
Well, let me itemize succinctly the activities of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. It educates the public about the importance of church-state separation. It publishes a monthly magazine called Church and State, which is a wonderful source for current trends in religious freedom. It litigates cases involving church-state infringements, and it files Friends of the Court briefs before the Supreme Court and lower courts. It advises educators, commissioners, and boards about church-state matters. It testifies before the U.S. Congress and local legislatures, state legislatures, and other governmental bodies. It organizes grassroots activism. It mobilizes faith communities. It supplies the media with expert opinion on matters relating to church and state. It monitors the activities of the religious right. It sponsors an annual conference which brings together people from all walks of life to acquaint them and address them and share information about the matter of separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that judges have different biases all up and down the line, but what has been the position of the Supreme Court in recent times?
Well, in recent times, we have kind of an odd situation. During the 12 years of the presidencies of Reagan and Bush, a number of the Supreme Court justices were reaching advanced stages, so it meant that Reagan and Bush had the opportunity to name a number of new members. And of course, they named conservatives and people who felt the same way they did. As it turns out, many of those people that they named turned out to be more in the central mainstream of American thinking than I think Reagan and Bush would have wished. It turns out that our Chief Justice, William Rehnquist, is a brilliant man, and he is one of the people foremost in the battle to lower the wall of separation between church and state. And he is joined by Scalia and Thomas, and so there are three who wish to abandon and diminish the wall of separation, which has been upheld so much. But I think the three are going to be lonely because it appears as though the major mood of the court today is more mainstream and more central. So I think the cause of separation of church and state, if we continue to fight for it, will be in good hands.
But Bush made a little mistake when he appointed Suitor, as it turns out.
Well, that's interesting because Suitor's advantage in getting approval was that he was kind of unknown to people. It turns out we can say today he might have been unknown to
Bush as well.
Yes.
Must have been.
Yes, I think so.
Must have been. That's right. He made a little mistake there. Did you tell us some of the people that you talked to, the groups that you talked to, what a range were interested in supporting your establishing the local active chapter?
In the past month or 6 weeks, I have talked to a very wide range of people. They include Unitarians, Jews, especially Temple Ahavat Shalom, Church of the Brethren, the National Organization for Women, a gay group, the National Council of Jewish Women, the Social Concerns Committee of the San Fernando Valley Interfaith Council, Planned Parenthood, and humanists. And as diverse as this group is, they share one very central concern.
Did you mention Atheists United?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Even if you did, I'd want to repeat that one.
Of course, it was so obvious.
Because it's really our pleasure to give you this platform, because it's so important what you're doing, and I hope that we'll be able to work together, you know, on many things in the future.
We are both passionate on one very important subject, and that's the separation issue.
Well, that's one of two or three.
That's right.
Now, you've been very impressive about what this organization, Americans United, can do because of the resources and strength of membership and so forth. But what can a single individual do? People always say, what can I do? I'm just one person.
I can mention three things specifically. One, of course, is to join Americans United for separation of church and state. And then the second thing is, having joined, you will be welcome to a large amount of information, some of which I've brought here on the and
all kinds of pamphlets on specific issues.
Pamphlets and books. Mm-hmm. And then arm yourself with the information contained therein so that you can refute the arguments of the people who want to tear down the wall of separation. Remember, what you do today, or what we do today, will affect our children and our grandchildren for many years. And then the third is vote, vote, vote. The political strategists of the religious right gloat over the fact that although they know they represent a minority of the American people, they can get their agenda imposed simply because such a small percentage of Americans go to the voting booths. And we must encourage more people to get familiar with the issues, familiar with the people, get active, and then above all, you must vote, vote, vote.
I noticed you brought a lot of books as well as pamphlets. Of course, this is my favorite pamphlet, which everybody should have, and it's got the 16 words from the Constitution. So any time that Pat Robertson says it's not in the Constitution, you could simply flash this. And then, of course, there are the many books that you brought, and it's too many to talk about right now because we seem to be running out of time. I hope we can continue this discussion at a future date and that you'll come again. Thank you so much for coming today. It's been the pleasure of Atheists United to bring this program to you. Separation of church and state is a main concern of Atheists United, so we applaud the good work of Americans United for the separation of church and state. We look forward to working closely with them. American United's activities, along with the activities of other like-minded organizations, are listed in our monthly newsletter. You can contact us at the address which will be shown at the bottom of the screen, or our phone number also listed at the bottom of the screen, for complimentary newsletter and or information about Atheists United. And we also invite you to join us at one of our open meetings to see firsthand what we're all about. We meet the fourth Sunday each month at Burton Chase Community Center at Marina Del Rey. For details, write us, Atheists United, Post Office Box 57435, Sherman Oaks, California, 91413. Or call us at 818-785-1743.